You are listening to Women Leading Prevention Science, where we host candid conversations with some of the most accomplished women in the prevention science field. I am Jasmine Ramirez, a counseling psychology doctoral student and a research associate at the University of Oregon. As I move through my early years as a prevention scientist, it is an honor to speak with these inspiring female leaders in the field. This podcast was developed as part of the NIH Helping End Addiction Long-Term Initiative, or the HEAL Prevention Cooperative. The views expressed in this podcast are those of the participants and not the official views of the NIH HEAL Initiative, NIDA, or the participating institutions and organizations. Today, I'll be talking with Drs. Lizette Saavedra and Claudia Santi Fernandez. Lizette is a bilingual Colombian and Indigenous woman, and Claudia is the multilingual child of parents who immigrated to the U.S. from Portugal and Italy. We'll be discussing how these identities have shaped their work in prevention science, specifically their efforts to strengthen inclusivity and equity among multilingual immigrant youth. Let's get started. Thank you both so much for joining me here today. Claudia, would you mind introducing yourself and your current work?
My name is Claudia Fernandez, and I am an assistant professor of medicine and in the Child Studies Center at the Yale School of Medicine. I'm also the founding director of Youth for Wellness at Yale, which I'll talk about later, and the deputy director of mental health and well-being at the Play to Prevent Lab. I got into this work because my father really served as this role model in the field of really thinking about who I want to impact and who I want to serve. And so my dad immigrated from Portugal when he was a teenager, from Portugal to the United States. And when he was younger, he grew up in, subsidized housing. His house was like a little casita, 400 square feet, 2 bedrooms, 4 people in the house, with a dirt floor. And when he came to the United States, he had a disability. He was deaf in one ear because he didn't, he didn't have access to health care. And he didn't speak English when he came here. He barely graduated high school because who would enjoy school if there were so many barriers and challenges in navigating this new system, right? However, my dad was this incredible futbolista, soccer player. He just was so deeply committed to soccer, and it was something that whatever he needed to do to play soccer, he did what he needed to do because he wanted to play the game. And so, although he, struggled with some of the academic stuff, really athletics and his extracurriculars in soccer served as a protective factor for him. And so this kept him out of so much trouble, and he ended up being incredibly blessed and became part of the United Nations peacekeeping mission, and lived in Angola, East Timor, Haiti, and had these incredible experiences to serve the community and so forth because soccer kept him out of trouble. And that was a very different trajectory as compared to some of my other family members who sadly, struggled with addiction. And so I share that story because that set the foundation for my interest and my commitment and my passion to this work. I became a, Spanish teacher after graduating college, later became a bilingual school counselor, worked in a dual language school in the New York City Department of Education. I got my master's in, bilingual school counseling with a focus on immigrant youth. And then I transitioned to opening up a school in Newark, New Jersey, where we built a Bard High School Early College and truly focused on student-centered, youth-centered policies, approaches, and just working with youth to ensure that we were supporting them in thriving. And today, I transitioned to the world of research to really cast a wider net and think about evidence-based practices with that student. In the majority of my work, of course, it's youth. Bring them to the table, center their work, and ensure that their voices are front and center at every stage of what we do.
Thank you so much for sharing that story about your father. And I can really see how it shapes your current work that focuses on protective factors and evidence-based practices as well. Lizette, would you mind doing the same?
I'd love to, Claudia. I loved hearing your story. So I am Lisette Saavedra, and I am a senior research psychologist at RTI International. And my work is centered on developing culturally responsive approaches to prevention and general intervention studies, mainly for anxiety, depression, and a range of substance use problems. So I was born in Miami, Florida, to Colombian parents, the Caribbean side, to be specific, from Barranquilla, Colombia, to have a mix of grandparents who immigrated from Spain or have Afro-Indigenous roots native to Colombia. And growing up in Miami, I was aware early on of the vast diversity in Latinos and Hispanic individuals, from people, especially from the Caribbean. Spanish was my first language, first 2 years of life. And in Miami, you have access to a bilingual education. And this really contributed to my proficiency in both languages. My parents came to the United States in the 60s. My mom was a nurse and my dad worked in aviation. And they were brought here due to workforce shortages in both fields. And that afforded us a privilege of documentation. We had a lot of worries, challenges with money my whole life, but being deported or a visa expiring is something I never worried about, but many of my friends did. And so I was a peer counselor in high school. I actually went to the largest high school in Florida. It was massive. And it was a school of contradictions. So situated in a middle-class neighborhood, but there was so much gang violence. But yet certain groups of individuals were still protected from this violence. And I don't remember at the time in high school wanting to be a psychologist, but I really enjoyed being a peer counselor. And in this work I was doing, I learned so much about different ways anxiety and depression can express themselves. And I think that's when I became interested in becoming a psychologist. And when I started my undergraduate years, I had an opportunity. That's when I met my advisor, Dr. Wendy Silverman, who at the time was at Florida International University, who is now actually with Claudia at Yale University. And she, along with Annette LaGreca, they were big child anxiety and trauma researchers at the time, and they were following families who were hit hard after Hurricane Andrew. And I was offered the opportunity to conduct interviews and capture levels of anxiety, depression, and other challenges like trauma. And my experiences as a peer counselor really helped me, but it was without a doubt my command of Spanish and English so that I can help truly, monolingual Spanish speaking families really helped. And after working with her, I was hooked. I stayed in South Florida and I continued to develop my work in anxiety treatments for severe childhood anxiety, and had an opportunity to expand a lot of our services to monolingual Spanish speaking. And that was a big thing that Wendy Silverman always supported, was the development of research materials, the questionnaires, the recruitment materials, to open our doors to families who only spoke Spanish. And, trying to ensure that families were not turned away because they didn't speak any English. And that's when I became interested in cultural congruence and different ways to be responsive to our research approaches to individuals who speak other languages besides English. And those were big experiences that have really shaped a lot of the work I do today.
Lisette and Claudia discussed the importance of building trust, recognizing varied experiences, and understanding cultural differences when working with immigrant populations.
So I've done this for a range of studies, and we would consistently hear that the language in consent forms is something that turns away and turns off many individuals. It can be jargony, and oftentimes individuals might not know that the language is there to protect them. But consent forms generally are such an American concept that individuals from other countries sometimes see this and, what is this document I'm about to sign? I don't want to get in trouble. I don't really understand what a lot of this is. And they might very easily say no. And so when we think about even developing materials that are equivalent, we also need to think about the experiences of those who will be reading them and understanding them. Sometimes, and so we've thought about different ways to do this. And this is just the consent form. Similarly, for other aspects of the actual interventions. But throughout this process, it has been so important to have them at the table.
Thank you so much for bringing up that point, because, our Lisette and I completely vibe off of one another when we talk about community-based participatory action research, and more specifically with, youth-led participatory action research. And I say that because, one of my former mentors would always say, progress moves at the speed of trust. And so we need to make sure as researchers that we are not only ensuring that they have a seat at the table, but that we make sure that there is a seat at the table and they feel belongingness with that seat at the table, so that they can share, and feel like their voice matters.
Yeah, we're very intentional about that process. It's not just inviting them and telling them what we're going to do. We invite them to challenge us on our evaluation approach, on what we're about to do. In my experience, this is absolutely key to building trust. And it needs to start really early. They are there informing us, and that relationship grows and it continues. But it really helps us ensure that we can then have authenticity and fidelity to the input that they're giving us. Or else it's not going to work. We have so many treatments that don't work. Mm-hmm. They work really well in these perfect settings. You implement them, and then why are they not working? And this process is not going to fix everything, but it really helps a lot.
Yeah. So that importance of community-based, participatory research isn't just involving the community at one step, but making sure that they are able to participate at every single step, right? And maybe that increases the efficacy of a treatment.
We have to make sure that we continue to send the message that not about me, without me. This work cannot be about you if it does not include you, even if it means, and in some of our work where they're challenging physicians and challenging people of authority, that is difficult. But we need to really stay true to that in order to really get good information about how we can make this work. And we are seeing it in a lot of the work that we're doing right now as part of the HEAL Prevention Coordinating Center and the initiative. In a lot of these projects, there is heavy community engagement, and you really do see how that really opens up opportunities to really understand the population you're working with, and the youth and the families.
And that's how I connected with, Lisette, is through the HEAL initiative. And so Lisette is at RTI, and I'm on a project where Dr. Lynn Feline is the PI to develop and evaluate a digital game to prevent opioid misuse in youth. So the initiation of opioid misuse. And similarly with the process from the lab, it started with having conversations with youth, and then we had conversations with, providers, and then we had conversations with those who may be in treatment for opioid use disorder, because they're able to reflect on what do you wish you knew that you didn't know. And so we brought all of these key stakeholders to build out the game that is currently in a large-scale randomized control trial. But even with that work, we're also looking at the implementation and delivery, and that, again, going back to our key stakeholders and having conversations about best practices to ensure that something that, is so thoughtfully created with a focus on mental health, because that came from the focus group work, is also disseminated in a thoughtful manner with evidence-informed practices. So that is one project of the 10. And that is how I connected with, Lisette, because as we are, through the HEAL Prevention Cooperative, that's the main takeaway, is you can't do this work alone. And so we have 10 projects, 10 robust teams working on these. And I commend the NIH for these initiatives, because it's these type of initiatives that prioritize team science, that prioritize really creating a movement that I believe will have like an enormous impact.
As Claudia and Lizette have worked with underserved communities, they have faced some challenges in conducting their research. They discussed how failures taught them critical lessons, such as the importance of having a support system when conducting research, and how being willing to pivot or embrace a new approach has turned challenges into opportunities.
The joke that I always have is that I feel like there is this written script that everybody in the room has and knows how to operate, and I don't know how to operate in this system at times. While I may sometimes feel like a chicken with my head cut off, I lean into my authenticity. I fail forward. For every success I've had 30 failures, 30 times that I fell flat on my face, 30 times that I walked into a room not knowing what I was really walking into because I had never done it before. Just having a support system that is just so strong, whether it be colleagues or whether it be mentors, people that you can learn from, people who can help you navigate, uncharted territory. So, my recommendation with these challenges would certainly be to fail forward.
I've had a lot of challenges in my work, and especially when working with minoritized youth and families. One big thing that I have learned, we've been able to really think about ways to involve other members of the community to bring them in or find different types of funding mechanisms. But when it comes to the actual implementation of programs or then the development of adaptations, a lot of the failures really reveal what the challenges are that need solutions. And so for implementing evidence-based approaches, using telehealth, for example, for anxiety and trauma, we found in our work with Central American and Mexican families, there was this hesitancy and reluctance to do what is considered evidence-based approaches, which are exposure-based. They didn't want to relive what they experienced in their country. And so we have pivoted and been working with mindfulness-based approaches and just opened up a whole world of researchers that have been doing this in the last 15 years and found it to be useful for individuals immigrating from other countries. And at the time, those were big challenges. We didn't know the best way to pivot. And we found that, again, going back to the patients, going back to the individuals and talking with them and finding out what the challenges are and inviting them to challenge us. So oftentimes they're like, yeah, it's great. I'm glad you're trying. Thank you so much for everything. It's like, no, you give us more when you tell us what's wrong and what you want to see. And it really has really turned those challenges into opportunities.
From what I hear, Lisette saying is also this, oftentimes in research, we are so focused on that deficit-based approach. Mm-hmm. And the shift really needs to be focused on the strength-based approach from the individual and the community. We can't approach it the same way that we're approaching youth who may have been born, raised in the United States. When we think about our measures, when we think about our scales that we use, thinking about what are we asking and how, what strengths are we seeing more from the intervention on a community level, on an individual level, and how do we also just continue to enhance? Because the communities that we're working with are incredibly resilient, have really navigated some significant trauma. And we want to find ways to support and also highlight the strength that they exhibit, but they can continue to thrive and be successful in what they're doing.
And we actually have language in some of our satisfaction, quality, post-intervention or post-research feedback we specifically have language about one of the best ways of showing gratitude and respect for us is to challenge us. So in that sense, even because individuals that come from other countries often will see teachers, school personnel, doctors, therapists as authority. I am here and not necessarily as they have an equal voice. And just even telling them, we work for you. So, and when you go to speak to other school staff about your child, they work for you. Whether you're fully undocumented, your child and you have a right to ask questions and to ask for what they need. And that sometimes is such a cultural shift, but it's part of even building capacity with families and youth about their participation, not only in our research, but in the healthcare system in the country that they're living in. And so it takes some time, but if you do it with sincerity and really just want to, and let them know that you want to hear what they have to say so that we are then in a better position to help other people with a very similar situation. They open up and magic happens.
Absolutely. It's really centering their voices. And also it's, just passing the baton to them and saying, you're the one leading this initiative. Where, I'm here to support and ensure your safety, but you're the ones leading this work. So the blog posts, the submissions, they are co-authors on everything that we do, because it is their voices, their opinions, their experiences, and just making sure that they are, front and center in the work that we're doing.
Lizette and Claudia had great advice for young women who are interested in pursuing a career in prevention science. Lizette wants young women to have access to learning about prevention science careers early, in high school, so they can go into college understanding possible career trajectories. Claudia wants young women to know that their uniqueness is a strength, and that pivoting from one path to another is okay, and might be more beneficial in the long run. Both Claudia and Lizette strongly believe it is important for young scientists to take care of their own health long-term because prevention science needs them.
I visit a lot of high schools, and I wish I would have known about possibilities. I mentioned I was a peer counselor in high school. It was such a critical time for me. But I wish I would have known at that age about the different opportunities there are to develop yourself as a researcher in prevention. It's not something you hear about. It's not your typical career day presentation. And so I visit a lot of STEM schools. I visit a lot of just general high schools. And I talk about the work that we do and the research that they can later contribute to, and the importance. This is especially important right now. So many of our youth are undergoing a serious mental health crisis. And one thing we have found in our work is youth early on in leadership positions, helping each other, and that was my experience as a peer counselor, can really bring out the resilience they often already have. And so I often give advice of letting kids know early that this is an option and that they will be consumers, even if they don't want to do this, that they will be consumers of this research, whether personally or with their families, and just opening them up to these possibilities of different career trajectories. And I think the earlier they know, the more opportunities that they can expose themselves to and open their eyes to different possibilities as they enter their university experiences.
Yeah, I completely agree. I definitely did not know about any of this, right? Until I started grad school. And even then, right, it was whoever I was connected to that got me where I am and doing the work I am doing. And so, yeah, I wonder what would have been different if I learned about this in high school, if I learned about it in my first psychology class. And I think it is so powerful to let the younger population know, like, the possibilities that exist. Yeah, Claudia, did you want to share your piece of advice?
Yeah, absolutely. One size doesn't fit all. You let your uniqueness, let your thinking outside the box approach, let that be your strength, your authentic, true self. Let that be value added to, we don't want an echo chamber. We want to make sure that we have unique voices at the table that actually disagree with one another and complement one another, actually. And so it's imperative that, like, when you think about who you are, what you want to do, and your interest in the field, that you stay true to who you are at your core, and you know, and just be mindful that that uniqueness is actually an incredible strength. And sometimes, you know, trust your gut, because sometimes you need to pivot. Right? It's okay that there is not one path. And so sometimes you may need to pivot, and making sure that you have a large support system of mentors, and feel like you keep hitting a wall, it's okay to pivot. And maybe it's actually more beneficial to pivot. My last thing would just be, in this work, it's so easy to get bogged down by the day-to-day, you know, working on this and running, you know, really getting in the weeds. And when I pick my head up and I remind myself of the why, it re-inspires me. So I say that to, maybe my last word of advice is just, you know, for each and every person to just know their why. You know, why, who is that person, that family, that school, that district, that community? Who are you serving, and why?
Mm-hmm. I agree, Claudia. I would only add, prioritize your health and your rest. In this really helps you stay in the game long term. Prioritize rest, prioritize your health, your mental health, your physical health. It's going to take you further, and it's going to help you help others. That's something that I wish I would have gotten a lot more of a lot earlier. It makes a big difference.
Note to self, cuídate.
Cuídate. I love it.
Thank you for taking the time to speak with me today, and thank you to our listeners for joining us for Women Leading Prevention Science. We hope you enjoyed this episode, and that you'll continue to join us as we host candid conversations with some of the most accomplished women in the prevention science field. We hope you'll share this podcast with your prevention science colleagues and with any young woman you know that may be interested in pursuing a career in science. The HEAL Prevention Cooperative is funded through the NIH HEAL Initiative, an aggressive effort to speed scientific solutions to curb the national opioid public health crisis. The HEAL Prevention Cooperative includes 10 research projects throughout the country and one coordinating center based at RTI International in Research Triangle Park, North Carolina. For more information on the NIH HEAL Initiative, please visit heal.nih.gov.